Hi, I'm Stacy, and I wanted to show you how to miter corners on a quilt today. Previously, we filmed a video to show you how to start attaching your binding and get the perfect seam width for a perfect binding. Miter corners are difficult for a lot of people because you can only do it 4 times on a quilt, so it's not like you get a whole lot of practice. So I want to show you here. I've started sewing my binding on, and I stopped just a couple of inches from the corner. Now what I want to do is fold this binding at a 90-degree angle and put a crease in it that goes exactly to the corner of this quilt. Now if you'll notice, get a flat spot, the raw edges of the quilt and the raw edges of the binding are all straight and even. Okay, I've creased it with my fingernail, or if you have a little finger press, you could use that. This crease is very difficult to see when you get it under the presser foot, so I'm just going to use my chalk marker and mark that. It goes the other way. Okay, so I'm using the differential feed on the Bernina 880. I'm using a number 20 foot because that's what we had available in the store. I really like to use a 34D. The sole plate is clear and you can see exactly where you're stitching. So I'm going to get this back up here. I've moved my needle to the far right, so I have the majority of my presser foot on what I'm sewing. So this, your seam allowance is not always 1/4 inch. It may be a bit more or less. This one seems to be right on the 1/4 inch line. And I'm going to sew down to that corner. And when my needle hits that crease, take one more stitch, I'm going to pivot, let me raise the presser foot, and sew off the corner. And you want to hit the exact corner of the quilt. So that's the beginning of your perfect miter. So you can see, I'm going to crease it back on my original crease. This is still all straight. I've sewn right to the corner. So fold this back, the binding back on itself with the raw edges of the quilt and the raw edges of the binding even. The key to a pretty mitered corner is to have all 3 sides of this binding even. So you can see these raw edges are even. The fold is even with the right hand raw edge of the quilt. And this is where most people get caught. These 2 folds in the binding need to be even with each other. A lot of times I see it tucked under a bit and it may look good on top, but then when you roll it back, it's not even and it's going to be almost impossible to miter that corner. So I have folded this. I'm going to put it back under my machine. Double check that everything's still in place. You can put a pin here if that would help you. And I'm going to continue with the same seam allowance I used on the other sides of the quilt. And let me get a little bit sewn here, and I'm going to show you another technique I like. Okay, so here is my mitered corner. And you can see how pretty that's going to fold on the back and the front. Okay, this is where most people stop. I want to give you a little hint here. If you will, I know you struggled to get those stitches into the corner, but if you just pull on those, you may have to flip one, pull those back out to your seam allowance. You can see where the binding has a fold, where I folded it back on itself there. And I'm going to stick my scissors in that fold and cut 2 layers right up to the seam allowance. Fold the binding back, fold the quilt back. That is 4 layers of binding. And if you take that out, it will reduce the bulk in your corner and make it a lot easier to fold. If you reduce the bulk that way, you're not cutting your quilt, which is valuable to me. You're just cutting your binding, which can always be replaced. So keep in mind when you're mitering corners that you have to get it right while you're there. If there's a mistake, it's really difficult to go back and correct that, because you're either going to have excess binding or you're going to be short on your binding when you try to fix it. So make sure before you leave that corner that it's mitered the way you want it to look. So I hope this has been helpful, and you can refer back to it or give us a call if you need some help. Thank you.